Johnny and I were just having a little bit of an altercation during the break.
Altercation?
He's saying that he's saying that there's more interesting sports than soccer.
There are. I just came up with 6 right off the top of my head.
Well, I tell you what, one of them is professional wrestling.
Amen.
Not to mention political wrestling.
That's
so
right.
Here we are, back with Christopher Hart.
And Aubrey Kahn, and Johnny Gunn, and Lucas Paris, who has the Periscope up and running. And Jeff sent us on the bridge. 407-774-8255 is the number. And the Rays post-game show is should be wrapping up here, well, shortly. Anyway, as soon as it does, we'll let you know. So you can go back, if you like to listen to us on AM 660 The Answer. We'll certainly let you know. All right, in the meantime, the Senate is back in session tonight. They may actually still be in session right now trying to figure out what they're going to do.
They're working on the weekend?
Yeah, old Mitch, had to call him back into session over the NSA thing.
They're going to get double overtime pay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We'll see what happens. They're working on the president and John Boehner. Telling you, this political season is getting stranger and stranger with these bedfellows. First it was the president and Mitch McConnell over the trade deal, right? Now it's the president and John Boehner over this NSA thing. And they basically have come up with a compromise which would keep the vast majority of the Patriot Act in place, but this data mining phone numbers would be scaled back.
So Muslims would not be checked.
Well, it would be harder for the government to do it. Let's just put it that way. What it is, and I'm going to be real brief about this and sort of oversimplifying, but basically the Patriot Act, amongst many things that it does, and by the way, it set up a secret court which hears, the government's case to award secret warrants for wiretapping and arrests and other things like that. And one of the duties of the secret court is to decide, when data mining is okay for the authorities to do. But the way it is set up now, the NSA basically collects and stores the information themselves. In other words, all the phone calls are being stored in the NSA brand new facility out there in Utah. And don't believe anybody who says they're not storing something out there, because they are. Because otherwise, why would they need such a huge place, a warehouse-like place, right? And I know this was like, I don't know, 12, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. The NSA was already storing this data. This is really nothing new. And occasionally they would use it in investigations. And some of the techniques used that this produces this data were used to get Pablo Escobar. All right? And so how long ago was it when Pablo Escobar was killed?
Right, but the Patriot Act expanded all.
Yeah, it did. And it sort of brought it into the open, more or less. But Jimmy Carter was the one who put in motion the notion of data mining, because it was during the Carter administration that the telecommunications companies began actual efforts towards digitalization of communications. Up until then, all communications were electronic. Okay? In other words, when you made a phone call, it was over a copper wire, and your voice was transmitted down the copper wire. And what happens now is, and this is why we can have mobile wireless devices, is the signal is digitalized. In other words, it's assigned a code, a barcode, if you will, a series of numbers, binary numbers, 0 or 1. You remember the binary system in school, folks?
Yep.
Okay, this is what it's all about. And that barcode then is therefore easily transcribed and can easily be stored, much more easily than tapes of conversations like you might, the old mafia movies with the electronic communications. So basically you can of course write this down on a piece of paper, right? It's a barcode. And you can take that piece of paper and plug it into a machine, and there will all be talking. Okay? Or at least this conversation will be transcribed. Let's put it that way. And so, now, what they say is they're not going that far, but they've been doing that for a long time, so it's hard for me to imagine they're not. And they store the information. And back then, the way they would retrieve it, and they had this big warehouse, I believe it was somewhere in Virginia, and they had robots. And they looked like something out of the Looney Tunes, because they had arms and they had wheels. Okay, and they would go up and down the aisles, and it was like they would go to the station where the operators worked, and they would basically, the operators would give them an assignment, and the doggone things would go speeding down the aisle, back and forth, going back and forth until it gets to the place where it's supposed to be. I mean, it's right out of the cartoons. It would reach up, grab the disc,
can with
and
the
then
disc.
There it goes back.
Right up.
Yeah, then he plugs it in, and there's your transcribed conversation. And so it's hard to believe they still don't have the capability and are doing that. But that's not what they're arguing about. What they are arguing about is the government simply having the phone numbers. So it's like we're arguing over, you know, the bad paint on a house that is collapsing, kind of. You know, just to use an analogy for firm foundation here. But what they are arguing about is that the government now collects all phone calls number to number. Okay, so if they get a tip on a particular number, they can go back and look and see what numbers that person called, and then see what numbers those people called, and they can basically take this out on an infinite search. You know, from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. Each one delivering them more leads. And this is part of the problem with this sort of data mining, is because it can become so inefficient because of the vast numbers involved.
Well,
now, what they're talking about doing, and I'll let you comment on it, what they're talking about doing is not allowing the government to store that data, but the compromise that Boehner and Obama have come up with is that the telecommunications companies like Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and all the others will be storing the data, and then the secret court can still issue the warrant for the government to go to these data storage places, which are now going to be AT&T, Verizon, whatever, and tell them, we need you to produce these records. And but nonetheless, what we are hearing, what they're talking about, is only a fraction, believe me, of what they are actually doing. And Rand Paul is making a big deal out of standing up to this, and he has slowed down the process and has at least made this compromise be put on the table, which he does not support. He wants bigger cuts in the program. But that is it in a nutshell. We shall see what comes out of it. But whatever comes out of it, you can rest assured we are still not going to know a whole lot of what's going on.
Well, there's a couple of things. The government keeps eroding more and more of our freedoms and liberties under the guise of security.
Right.
We all know that the Obama administration includes the Justice Department, the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, and all of these other departments are sticklers for the law. They never break the law, do they?
Oh, wow.
Right.
Only if they have good cause.
So
right?
when the Obama administration comes to an agreement with Bonehead or McConnell, do you think they're going to stick to it? That's number one.
Well, that's what.
If you do, I have a bridge I could sell you. All right, that's number one. Number two, this data storage thing. It's just so that the government doesn't have to store it. If let's say the phone company that they approach for it says no, we're not giving it to you, they lose their license, they cannot operate. Guess what's going to happen to your fees, folks?
If that were
You're going to have a storage fee added onto this.
No doubt.
This is just more smoke and mirrors. I'm sorry.
That's all it is. It pretty much all it is. Now, Rand is making basically the same arguments, and he doesn't have a whole lot of support, though, so he can stretch this out, but at the end of the day, it will come to a vote in the Senate. You don't need the end of today, but then perhaps before the end of the week, there will be a vote.
The people in the House and the Senate, the majority, and I'm talking about the Democrats and the rhinos who call themselves the Republican Party, they're not interested in what's right, what's constitutional, or what's good for the people. They're only concerned with their pocketbooks and what they can get away with.
Well, I agree with that. Well, it's a bigger thing than that. Big government tends to want to get bigger and bigger, and if we are going to have them protect us, why, they have to be in our lives, right? That's basically the argument here. And the problem with Rand is he can make this look like he's a one-trick pony. He's got to try to get himself some support from other senators here. Otherwise, his efforts are going to be for naught. And at the end of the day, as I said, and as Aubrey is saying, this is all just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. The whole Patriot Act needs to be reviewed seriously.
Rescinded.
Well, it certainly needs to be reviewed. That's for sure. And major parts of it do need to probably be rescinded. It's always going to be a trade-off. If you want to be totally safe and secure, why don't you go live in a prison? Right? They'll take good care of you there, right?
Will they?
No, that's the whole point. Government is never really capable of doing it. It's always just a pipe dream. And so they always have a great excuse that we can do this, but they always need to be more intrusive to do it, and even then it's
more money, more employees, less freedom.
No problems.
And more with the American Adversaries when we come back.